Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Uday Bhaskar. It's budget month and hence this week we look at the fine print of the defense budget and what it means for the Indian military. First, some facts and figures. The Finance Minister allocated a total of rupees 3,59,854 crores as the budgeted estimate for defense in financial year 2017-18 or the current year. This works out to 2.14% of the estimated GDP or gross domestic product for India for this financial year. This is the fiscal allocation to maintain a 1.3 million plus military, and apart from the Army, Navy and Air Force, this allocation also caters for the Coast Guard, the Defence R&D, the Defence Public Sector Units and the Ordnance Factories in the main. Pensions are a major component of the total defence expenditure, and this head alone is rupees 85,740 crores in the current financial year. This is for both the uniformed and the civilian personnel. Is this allocation minus the pension amount adequate to ensure that the Indian military is as well equipped as it ought to be to face any untoward incident that threatens national security? The answer is mixed. For the Indian military has major inventory gaps, for example, the artillery guns, fighter aircraft and submarines, to list just a few major items. Yet some anomalies persist in the defense allocation and utilization. Despite the inventory gaps, the Ministry of Defence has returned large sums of money from the capital head over the last 2 years as unspent. Why is this happening? And is this just procedural delay? Or do we need an appropriate overhaul of higher defence financial management? To discuss these issues, we have an eminent panel. As always, allow me to welcome and introduce our guests. Lieutenant General Philip Campos, a former Vice Chief of the Army Staff, Mr. Amit Kaushish, a former Financial Advisor Acquisitions in the Ministry of Defence, and Dr. Arvind Virmani, who was the former Chief Economic Advisor and the Executive Director at the IMF. Let me turn to you first, General Campos. You know, the Indian Army is clearly the lead service. It's 1 million plus. And we are constantly talking about this revenue capital kind of imbalance in terms of modernization. So what is your assessment as the former Vice Chief of the Army in terms of the latest budget and the trends that you would be able to perhaps place in perspective for us?
See, when the military in general and the Army in particular looks at the budget, we always look at the bottom line, which relates to capital modernization. Will the Army get enough money to ensure that it can meet its modernization needs? The problem has been in the last few years, from about 80% of the Army's budget going into revenue, it's been steadily increasing. And a year or two back, it had reached 85% revenue and about 15% capital. What this implies, once you take in the issue of committed liabilities, that means the year-on-year payments for items which have already been bought in previous years, you really do not have any money left for what we call new schemes or capital modernization.
Or even the acquisitions.
And that's what actually, I mean, when I talk about modernization, essentially we are looking at two things. Modernization of the Army or the military, when we are talking about a replacement of vintage equipment. Old technology or old equipment which is no longer mission reliable has to be replaced. So that's one big component of modernization of the force. And the second issue is that keeping economy in mind, we try and pick up some items which can be upgraded technologically and still be used.
So would
that
it be
is-
fair to say that on balance that the current pattern is inadequate for the modernization requirements? Would that be a fair assessment?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's stop you on that and
I
ask.
just want to add one more issue, which is not generally talked about when we talk about modernization. I mentioned about new procurements and upgrading of equipment, but there is something else called hollowness, which the Army uses and has been using for many years now. Hollowness implies deficiencies, existing deficiencies of weapons, equipment, and ammunition. And this is again a major requirement for which the services, or at least the Army,
Need
is looking at
consistent.
every time.
But I'll come back to the hollowness issue if I may. But Mr. Kaushish, if I could ask you to just pick up the thread from here, despite this kind of, shall we say, gaps, if you look at all three services, he's spoken about the Army, ditto for the Navy and the Air Force. We have seen empirically that over the last 2 or 3 years, the capital budget remains unspent. The finance minister even made reference to this in his post-budget remarks. So how would you describe, as someone who's worked in the MOD, particularly in acquisitions, what is the reason for returning money as unspent?
See, first of all, I'll say that there are not very many empirical studies which will actually reveal what is the problem with the system. So there are a lot of theories floating around. Everybody has a view. I can only share my view on why it is happening. Somebody would say that it's because of the procedures, but with the same procedures, Navy, for example, has done better than the other service. Somebody would say it's because of bureaucracy, but I'll say again, the same bureaucracy, Navy and Air Force, they have done better. At the end of the day, I think the problem lies with decision making. Now,
Lies with decision making?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, in my opinion, and based on my experience, I would say that every procurement program has to be nurtured, nursed, and as long as it's on track, there is no problem. It will keep going. But every program is bound to run into difficulties, which is where it becomes very difficult for the system to take a call on the difficult situation that has arisen and take it forward. This, in my opinion, of course, one can talk of many other things which are responsible, but in my opinion, this is the most important reason why, over the years, money remains unspent.
I'm going to come back to you a little later, because this fidelity to expenditure control, it is a trait that we associate with most people with the Ministry of Finance, whichever other departments they're working in. But I'll come back to you. Dr. Virmani, if I could request you to share your thoughts. Now, General Campos spoke about this revenue capital trend as far as the military itself is concerned. And in the case of the Army, he spoke about almost 85 and 15%. Overall, we have seen over the last couple of years two kind of indicators. One, that from 2015-16 to where we are now, defense allocation as a ratio of GDP has declined. That's number one. The second is, for the military, the revenue expenditure is likely to go up because of pensions, because of standing costs and various policies the government has announced. So in terms of macroeconomy for India, is it possible to increase GDP defense ratios, and how do we manage the capital revenue?
So if we look at the trends of defense allocation to GDP, there's a consistently downwards trend from roughly the 90s. In my view, this is very unfortunate. In fact, I think if I was looking at the numbers. Last year was the low point of about 2.16%. I think, in my view, that's much, much too low. I mean, even in the old days, a lot of people used to talk about 3%. I said, let's at least get to 2.5%.
Yeah, exactly.
Which we haven't been for ages now. So that is the first thing. I think the trend is bad. Second point, which both everybody has made, but I'll put it in a slightly different way. I mean, this year the allocation for pensions increased by 20,000 crores, while the capital budget has only increased by 5,000 crore. So much of the procurement, both the questions you addressed to the my colleagues here, is that if you don't have a certainty in the allocation and becomes kind of a residual, which is what it appears to be from the trend, that it's kind of happenstance, then you get bad planning and ineffective procurement. But and just a second point which goes with it actually is the whole we've been talking about for years, the reform of the higher defense management, you know, integrated defense procurement, planning, etc. Somehow it always, you know, we always, it always seems to be almost there, but never happens.
And comes
that's
up
very
every
important.
time in budget month, and then we forget about it.
So these go together, in my view. You know, the country will not support 2.5 or 3% unless it grows along with more effective and efficient procurement of capital.
Well, we are on Rajya Sabha TV and you're a former chief economic advisor, so I'm sure this would be sort of taken on board. But Philip, if I can come back to you, one of the recurring kind of themes is that the Indian Army in particular is very manpower intensive. And theoretically, everyone says that the only way you can balance this is reduce the manpower so that you can reduce the revenue expenditure and thereby use the excess kind of funds available for modernization and the higher technological upgrade. But to me as an analyst, this seems catch-22, because if the government is tasking the army in the manner that it is for internal security duties, you have external responsibilities and various other exigencies, how do you get out of this? I mean, I'm sure as Vice Chief, you must have looked at this very closely.
I agree with you that essentially the manpower is there because of the extensive responsibilities which have been given to the army. As you are aware, all our disputes with our potential adversaries are territorial land border disputes, and we have got very long borders. And we've also got an militancy and insurgency in parts of the country which require boots on the ground. So there is a manpower requirement which cannot be avoided. Hence, over a period of time, the army has kept expanding. And as we are all aware, as we speak, the army is still expanding because we've got the accretions for the northern border, as they are called, an additional 90,000 troops who was sanctioned some 4 years back, and which will take another 2 or 3 years before the entire numbers come in. And this is there because there were gaps perceived in our border management layout, where the disputed borders are, where the army is responsible. So all this costs money, and we are aware that this manpower can be cut down at some point. But for the manpower to be optimized, then you require technology.
More technology.
You
So that's the
require-
catch-22.
That's the catch-22. That unless you modernize and get better equipment, weapons with better ranges, night vision devices, you cannot reduce the manpower. And that modernization is not taking place. So in lieu, we are
Increasing the
manpower.
So which really means that it's almost like a cul-de-sac. But let me ask you, Amit, on this. I mean, this is a problem I'm sure that must have been placed in front of the people who are advising the minister on matters finance. Now, some years ago, I'll ask Arvind also to weigh in on this. Mr. Jaswant Singh, as defense minister, had once mooted this proposal that unspent money should go to some kind of a pool. And can that be utilized for whatever be the priorities the government decides on? Now, what General Campos is saying, that if you have the money, you can bring about a technological upgrade and thereby reduce manpower. Is it possible to envisage some kind of a financial support for such a macro plan?
See, on the one hand, the argument is that the government doesn't let procurements take place because there is no money. On the other hand, the argument is that the unspent balance should be, rolled over to the next year. So if you have no money, there is nothing to be rolled over. Secondly,
No, one second. This is only MOD which is returning the money. The GOI, I presume, has money. No, they don't. Okay.
I mean, that is the argument, that the cases go to CCS and they don't get approved because there is no money.
They're balancing the books.
I'm just saying
Okay.
this is an argument. Secondly, and more importantly, the point is that this issue has been examined by MOD, and also, I mean, it's there in the standing committee reports. In the year in which you will need the money to make payments, the government will have to, in any case, raise the resources. So unless you have the money in the given year in which you need it, you can't spend it. Secondly, again, in the year in which you need to spend that money, you will have to go to the parliament to
Get the approvals.
Get the approval. So how does it help? It's not very clear. I mean, it's not to say it shouldn't be there, but to say that this is going to solve all the problems. This is a panacea for the ills that we are.
I'm going to ask the former chief economic advisor, what is the way out financially in terms of?
So the key, I take off from where I ended. The key is certainty in funding and planning. Whatever it is, because defense is long-term acquisition. We're talking about capital here, right? And modernization. It's a long-term perspective. Whether it's the technology, it's a study of your potential opponents or whatever it is. So the problem is the whole first, of course, the procurement system. There is talk, I'm sure everybody has heard, of setting up a procurement agency which gives a little more certainty in the processes. So if you have random changes in the amount of time, which takes something was average is 4 years, it goes from 1 year to 10 years, really there can't be any effective planning. The second part is the finance. You're absolutely right. Once there is a certain clear idea of the percentage of GDP which we, let's say, allocate to capital itself, forget the rest of it. Let that be part of the usual system because that's so many other revenue. But at least the capital part, there has to be some certainty. And in that, I would support this kind of isolation, provided there is this planning system of integrated, this brings us to the CDS issue. There has to be some kind of an integrated planning, which
I'm sure
General Compos knows very well, where choices are made.
But Amit, you want to say something on this?
I want to make a point about the certainty of allocation. Now, again, based on my experience, and I was associated with the 11th plan and the 12th plan, the Finance Ministry did indicate what is the likely growth that the Ministry of Defence can take into
consideration,
take as the basis for planning. And it happened for the 12th plan also. It happened for the 10th plan also. As a matter of fact, in the last year's medium-term fiscal policy statement, it very clearly states that the expectation is that in 2017-18 and 18-19, the defence expenditure will be about 1.6% of the GDP. So it's not as if there is complete lack of certainty as to what kind of money is likely to be available. The problem has been twofold. One, that we have, when I say we, I mean the Ministry of Defence, has not really been able to plan according to the likely availability of funds. And there are a whole lot of problems with the planning system itself, the process of planning, and then followed by the procedural tangles and decision making and so on and so forth. So the point I wanted to make was that it is not really, as per my experience, it's not because of the uncertainty about allocation that all these problems have come.
But I must add here, Amit, that I know that over the last 10-15 years when we have discussed this, I have heard defense secretaries who have demitted office actually saying that as the senior most bureaucrat in the MOD advising the minister, they do not know year to year whether they will get the kind of money that they are seeking. But I'll come back to this. General Campos, one point here. Now, there is a suggestion that if you have a CDS and if you were to have greater integration, as Dr. Virmani has said, in terms of the armed forces, the military and the Ministry of Defence, is the process going to get more effective? Will it become more nimble, or will it really be more of the same?
Before I answer that question, I'd just like to comment on the issue that was being discussed before that about some sort of certainty in the defense funding. If, as the Army Vice Chief or the Army Chief, if I'm aware that whatever money has been allocated to me will not be taken away at some stage, and it gets taken away very fast. Actually, when the financial year starts, in April, for the first couple of months, there are no sanctions. Everybody says the financial year has just started. And then before you know what, you are told that if you haven't got your approvals by November,
money will go back.
Money will go away. So in a matter of about 3 to 4 months, if the files, and these files may be pending for the previous year, the entire financial year, if they are not cleared, and mostly they are not cleared because the money is not there, the money is taken away. So if there was certainty in terms of a non-lapsable rollover fund sort of thing, then at least you are aware that whatever money has been given, I can use it for procuring some.
I mean, this is what Dr.
immediate-
Virmani is saying, that at least for
Yeah.
the capital head, let there be some sanctity.
So this has come up for discussion, and as we speak, I'm told that this is again
On the table for
on the
consideration.
table for the standing
Well, we'll
committee.
flag this for the benefit of our viewers. But quickly, Philip, can you come in on the
Now to
CDS?
come back
If you
on
have
the
a CDS, will it
it's a
resolve the
very-
problems?
It's a very, very important thing. You see, because we are lacking funds. We are all know there is a funds crunch, that the money is not there, capital modernization. If you actually come into the figures, you will find that the amount of 86,000 crores that we spoke about, which actually come down to nothing when it actually comes in terms of how much money you will have in this year.
Well, one
to
estimate
buy-
said 5,000 crores,
No,
if that is
but-
accurate.
But that 5,000 crores, at least for the army part, which will be about 1,500 crores, will also be used to sort of cushion the effect of, say, the additional allowances that may come about due to the seventh pay commission, or additional fuel bills which may come up if the cost of oil goes higher. All these will also get picked up within this 5,000 crores.
So having a CDS won't make that much of a difference.
CDS makes a difference if the money is there. I mean, I'm presuming that at the end of the day, there has to be some amount of procurement or acquisition that will be done. But here comes the problem. The problem is that all the services have got their list ready, and everybody insists that mine is the
Higher priority.
higher priority. So who's the one who decides? Who's
And
the
that's
one
the
who has the
CDS.
authority?
Just hold that thought, Philip. I'm just going to ask for a quick last comment from you, Arvind. As CEA, did you ever look at defense allocation in a focused way and come up with options, or is it something that doesn't happen?
In the planning commission, we often discuss this. It was totally outside our purview. So we never had any.
So
sense of
in
it.
short, we have had a large budget which doesn't get much planning support. But I think, this is the kind of discussion on the Indian defense budget that needs much more time. I hope we can revisit it. But the structural constraints in the allocation and utilization of fiscal support to the Indian military is in need clearly of rigorous review and perhaps a rearrangement of priorities. Perhaps again, from inflexible expenditure control to the tangible creation of military capacity. Concurrently, the quality of this military capacity must keep pace with the changes that technology mandates. The short point really is that the average Indian infantry soldier must be as well, if not better equipped than the adversary, be it a terrorist or otherwise. The capital to revenue ratio in the defense budget needs to be pulled back from its current orientation. This again is an uphill task given the manpower intensive nature of the Indian Army in particular. But as our discussion showed, rapid downsizing is not an option when the tasking of the Indian Army is so expansive, from internal security duties to defending the border in a very complex regional environment. India has to perforce nurture a military that can deal with a wide spectrum of challenges, should the need arise, from deterring weapons of mass destruction to Mumbai of November 2008 and more. Optimum fiscal management is imperative, and this must also enable greater indigenous design and manufacturing capability of military hardware. It is encouraging, in a slender manner, to note that some major rewiring of the higher defense management of the country is on the anvil, and hopefully the current political resolve of the Modi government will yield the desired results. On that note, allow me to thank my guests, General Campos, Mr. Kaushish, and Dr. Arvind Virmani. And thank you for watching Security Scan. Goodbye.